Hello everyone, my name is Farai Mwakutuya and welcome to yet another edition of the Focus Weekly. Intellectual property, what is it? Why does it matter? And how does Zimbabwe stand to benefit from it? Find out answers to those questions and a whole lot more on this edition of the Focus Weekly, where we are speaking to a legal practitioner who specializes in the field. This is the Focus Weekly, and as mentioned earlier, I'm speaking to a legal practitioner who specializes in intellectual property. Moses Nkomo is a senior partner for D&M attorneys, but also a specialist in intellectual property. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Farai. Thank you for having me on the program.
Great. Now, as I often like to say, is let's not take anything for granted. So when we hear the term intellectual property, what are we talking about here?
So, Farai, in basic terms, it's intellectual and property. Intellectual has to do with the human mind. Property is something that is intrinsic value, that can be owned, that can be transacted upon. So that's a layman's definition of intellectual property. The creations of the human mind that have intrinsic value, that can be owned, that can be transferred, that can be sold, that can be transacted upon. So in very basic and very simple terms, it's the product or the creations of the human mind.
Okay. And there are different perhaps elements or branches to intellectual property. What are some of those?
So, like we have tried to define intellectual property, the human mind is exercised in different fields. It's exercised in engineering, it's exercised in commerce, it's exercised in art, it's exercised in agriculture. So whenever intellectual property is created in those fields, it assumes a certain character. So for engineering or for the sciences, you are talking of patents, you're talking of utility models, you're talking of designs. When you're talking in commerce, you're talking of trademarks, trade secrets, confidential business information. When you're looking at the arts, you're looking at things like copyright and what are called neighboring rights, broadcasters' rights, performers' rights, publishers' rights. So all those are different kinds of intellectual property. In agriculture, you talk of plant breeders' rights, you're talking of geographical indications, you're talking of gene sequences which can be protected either under a sui generis system or they're protected as patents.
Okay. Now, I think most Zimbabweans will have maybe interfaced with intellectual property in the form of trademarks, which, we're obviously a registered trademark, and also issues of, copyright. We hear musicians bemoaning the fact that they've been pirated, movies have been pirated. What is the value as a nation? What is the value that we could be getting or are getting from intellectual property?
So, Farai, we are in a knowledge economy. And in a knowledge economy, it's to be differentiated or distinguished from a resource-based economy. We used to say the three factors of production were land, labor, and capital. While those are still relevant, the dominant factor of production now is knowledge. And in a knowledge economy, it is the intellectual property, how the nation harnesses the intellectual capital, how it enables its people to produce intellectual property that, like we said at the beginning, here's a value that can be traded locally, regionally, and internationally. So you look at the economies that are doing well right now. They do not trade in commodities. They do not trade in resources. They trade in solutions. The major companies are actually solution companies. They're no longer brick and mortar industries. They are knowledge assets. The top brands in the world don't have a factory anyway. They produce solutions. So as a nation, it's a fact that we have not grasped, and we are losing a lot because we have very creative people that are producing solutions for other people. When you go to the United States of America, you go to Silicon Valley, there are a bunch of Zimbabweans that are in Silicon Valley, and they're doing amazing things there. Yet back home, we are not reaping the reward for that. So in copyright, our talent has been harnessed. We have Zimbabweans that have featured on Hollywood, but where's the money going? How can we develop our own homegrown industry to compete? Okay, fine, Hollywood might be too high a standard to go after. But on the continent, we have our own Hollywood. It started from scratch. Why is it that we can't develop a creative industries in Zimbabwe? It boils down to a lack of appreciation of intellectual property. We think art is for marombe.
Those who have failed in
academia are the ones that go into art. But how many billionaires have been made out of art? Not just in America or in India, but out of Nigeria. How many millionaires has the art industry created in Nigeria? And why can't we do the same as a country? Just to harness. Out of interest, I may need to highlight that I think before 2015, South Africa used to be the biggest economy on the continent. Nigeria overtook South Africa as the biggest economy when they accounted for the contribution of their creative industries.
So that was just what pushed the needle.
It changed the whole dynamic. Why? Because they understood we are now in a knowledge economy. For Nigeria, it was no longer about the oil. It was about the inexhaustible resource of the human intellect, the talent that Nigerians have, which talent is not different from what Zimbabweans or any other African has. But that consciousness and that deliberateness to say, this is an industry. Let us develop it. Let us enable it. Let us support it. That is what we lack in Zimbabwe.
Who should be or leading this effort? Is it the authorities who must push and support? Is it the industry players themselves who must lobby for more? In your view, where should it start?
I'll give you a practical example. In the United States of America, the Constitution recognizes intellectual property. But it doesn't end there. It creates an obligation on the head of state, the President of the United States of America. Whenever he gives the State of the Union address, he is required by the Constitution to report on the state of American intellectual property. So when it is understood at that highest level, everything else lines up. The economic programming of the United States of America revolves around intellectual property. What America exports is not raw materials. It's not commodities. They export intellectual property, and that's their competitive advantage. But it doesn't end with the politics. The industry players themselves, you have to take ownership. This is about their livelihood. We should be having actual celebrities in this country that make their money out of their intellectual property.
Let me stop you there, Mr. Nkomo. We need to continue this discussion. Very engaging, very exciting, and we'll come back and continue as we explore more to do with intellectual property and perhaps how Zimbabwe can maximize this resource. This is The Focus Weekly. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It is The Focus Weekly. We continue the discussion focusing on intellectual property. Before we went to the break, you were talking about the United States, how there is legislation, but also the actors themselves, the stakeholders, the industry players come and step up. Just reminds me, I think it was a couple of months ago, writers, the Hollywood Guild of Script Writers were on strike, and even actors came out in support to say, look, these guys are on strike, we are not acting. So I think it's that sort of, unity of purpose that you're talking about.
It's that united vision that makes the whole thing work. Intellectual property is the ultimate game changer. It has been called the oil of the 21st century. We have seen in the 20th century the emergence of the Middle East based on oil. And they're saying intellectual property can do to the rest of the world the transformation that was witnessed due to oil in the Middle East.
So what do we do as Zimbabwe? You gave the example of the US where it is law at the highest levels. When you look at our laws here, are they ideal? Are they conducive?
We have some of the best laws on the continent, and I would not expect a lot to happen on the law reform side. What we need is exploitation of the intellectual property system. What we have witnessed since independence is a focus on protection of intellectual property. And I think that is a disservice to the nation. Countries like South Korea, countries like China, countries like India, they got the sequence right. The initial focus must be to enable creation of intellectual property. Before we get worried about protection, let's enable the creation of intellectual property. One of the key principles in intellectual property is called the principle of territoriality of intellectual property rights. And that is a principle that we can exploit to make the intellectual property system work for us. How does it work? It says intellectual property rights are specific to a geographical location or geographical jurisdiction. What is protected in the United States does not automatically become protected in Zimbabwe. What opportunity does that give us? It gives us an opportunity to reverse engineer on what is not protected in Zimbabwe but is publicly available elsewhere. That is how South Korea developed its automobile industry. That is how South Korea developed its electronics industry. They simply did not protect European and American patents. And exploiting the principle of territoriality, they then reverse engineered. But even the Japanese, that's how they built the robust automobile industry. After the Second World War, the Japanese, they reverse engineered American automobiles because they were not protected. The technology was not protected in Japan. And now the Japanese are the leaders in the automobile sector. Having created intellectual property, now they seriously protect it. The problem we have in Africa and the rest of the developing world is that we are so concerned about protecting other people's intellectual property without first focusing on creating our own intellectual property. So there's what I call the intellectual property value system. That starts with creation. After creation, then you get worried about protection. But beyond protection, we should also be engaged in conversation about how to commercialize the intellectual property. We have created these innovations, these inventions. How do we make the inventors make money?
True. That speaks, that just reminds me of a point what you're making. We are so preoccupied with protecting other people's IP, not commercializing our own. There are now in Europe people who are taking medicines from here, even Maheo, for instance, and patenting them over there. These are our own intellectual property.
That's very sad, and it's so pervasive. People that we host here as tourists, most of them are bioprospectors. They will be looking for genetic resources. They ask our tour guides, what does this help? What does this help? And they volunteer that information. When they go back there, they make medicines. They make interventions. Somebody in China registered a patent on a method of growing Zimbabwean tobacco.
Wow.
It's not a method of growing tobacco. It's a method of growing Zimbabwean tobacco. So while we are celebrating that, we have a niche market in the tobacco sector. Very soon somebody will be growing Zimbabwean tobacco in China. And that competitive advantage will be taken away.
Yeah.
It's because we have not harnessed the IP value chain. So beyond just commercialization, we need to start speaking about how to manage intellectual property portfolios. Our creators, our innovators, our inventors, they must be capacitated to look at their creations as assets and to create portfolios of such assets, which they must be assisted to manage in a way that maximizes their return. So people should then be capacitated to ensure that their patents do not lapse, that their trademarks are renewed, that their trade secrets are kept secret. That's how successful enterprises have done it. Coca-Cola has maintained its trade secret as a secret for over 100 years. That's management. But our people, they volunteer their secrets to anybody, even who doesn't even care about their welfare. So we need to speak about management. Then the last aspect of the IP value chain is enforcement. When somebody comes and expropriates our intellectual property, how do we get redress? So those are issues that we need to look at, but we need to look at them holistically with a strategic thrust. Not only for the benefit of individuals, but there is a national cause in it. The transformation of the nation actually depends on how we harness the intellectual property.
On that note, we need to take another short break. Stay with us. We'll continue this discussion on the Focus Weekly. Welcome back. We continue the discussion. My guest is Moses Nkomo. He's an IP expert. He's a senior partner for D&M Attorneys. We're talking about intellectual property and the potential it has for Zimbabwe, perhaps the areas in which we're missing out and what we need to do in terms of addressing that. I came across some very interesting statistics. Just China, I think in 2022, their Office of Intellectual Property recorded some figures, and I just want to read them here. 798,000 invention patents, 2.8 million utility model patents, 721,000 design patents. Now, when I hear IP, I think it's inventions and things that, new things. Can there be 798,000 new things, new inventions? Because I think for me, it's what new things could we possibly do that can become patents or trademarks or,
There could be actually more than that.
Yeah.
Why? Remember, we said intellectual property is about the human mind. And this resource is infinite. Humans can create beyond what we have ever imagined. What is required is an environment that promotes invention, that promotes innovation, that says, you know what, Farai, explore ways of improving this. How best can we leverage on what is existing? How can we do things in a better way? I'll tell you a fascinating story. In 2014, I was part of the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. And I spent 6 weeks at Yale University in the US. During that period, we interacted with young people. These would be 16-year-olds. They would be in Form 3 if they were here. They were stationed at Yale University in the Center for Engineering and Innovation Design. 16-year-olds. And what were they doing there? They were under the tutorship of top engineers, top professors in engineering and design. And their task was to design the future.
Very open-ended.
Very open-ended.
Yeah.
Look at the challenges that we are facing or that we are likely to face in the future and come up with solutions, not in a reactionary manner. Anticipate what might go wrong in future. And these are 16-year-olds designing the future. Now, if you have such an environment, 750,000 is a very small number, especially if you catch them young. I'll tell you, I've a 12-year-old son. Says, Daddy, when I grow up, I want you to build me a house with an underground basement. I want to be making my stuff underground. But I look at it and say, do I have capacity to enable him to realize his dream, to create solutions in his chosen area? I would rather he start this law so that he carries on the legacy of the firm. So that is where we are missing it. China and other emerging economies have understood the potential of intellectual property, and they actively promote it. In China, they teach intellectual property from kindergarten. So a child in preschool is taught that you can actually be a creator. You start by improving that which we have. What they designated as utility patents are improvements on existing technology. Engineering patents are those ones that have probably some aspects of breakthrough technology, new ways of doing things. Designs is just improving the appearance of things. To say, let's come up with a cooler design, something that's more appealing, something that is postmodern. So the possibilities are infinite. And our institutions of higher learning, for Zimbabwe, I will not start it at kindergarten, because at universities we are doing the wrong things. We have Harare Institute of Technology that has more commerce graduates than technology graduates. We have polytechnics that are producing more commerce graduates, accountants, human resources practitioners. The National University of Science and Technology, more graduates graduate from the humanities than graduate from sciences. So we have the infrastructure, but we are not utilizing that infrastructure. Our universities should be churning out thousands of designs, utility models, patents, new plant varieties. Our agriculture students are studying the wrong things. And it's because we have this model that was designed to create employees and not create creators. And I think that is where our biggest problem is.
Yeah, indeed. Very interesting. I just want to now come to something else where I think obviously you've spoken to the very technical sort of, these patents and things like that, but there are also things that we could take advantage of in terms of being Zimbabwe, our geographical area, things that could make we could uniquely do here or do better than everyone else that we could also monetize and commercialize.
There are plenty of those, Farai, plenty of them. I don't know whether this is factual or it's a myth that the former Queen of England used to eat only beef from Zimbabwe. And that is because our climate is unique. The meat that you get in Zimbabwe would be different from the meat that you get anywhere else because of the climatic conditions. You talk of fish from Kariba. The Kariba bream, I've argued with people, and I'm prepared to argue forever. Mm-hmm. Kariba bream tastes different. Mm-hmm. It's unique. It has this richness that you don't find it in any other bream. And it is because of the geographical conditions of the Kariba Dam, which are conducive for the growth of that fish in that particular way. You're talking of agricultural products from Manicaland. You talk of Wonde Valley, you talk of Kashel Valley, you talk of Chipinge. Those geographical conditions are suitable for the production of particular quality of products. So without much value addition, you take avocados from Wonde, you export them as Wonde avocados under a geographical indication that attracts a premium price in Europe. But where are we selling those avocados? At Mbarensik. $1 for a lot.
$1 obo.
Yes. $1 for obo.
Mm.
But these are things that we don't need to invest a lot. It's simply locating markets. Register a geographical indication. Mozambique has registered a geographical indication for what they call the Tete goat. They're telling people that you don't get goat meat this good anywhere in the world. And in terms of the TRIPS agreement, a geographical indication says it's the name of a place where a product comes, the quality, reputation, or other characteristics of which are connected with the place of origin. Here is the interesting thing. The quality is objective. You can test quality. Other characteristics, you can quantify them. Reputation is subjective. So we can tell the world that, you know what, if you want this particular product, Zimbabwean is best.
So indeed, food for thought, and hopefully anyone listening who will pick up on that, and hopefully we'll see some of these geographical indicators of different zones of Zimbabwe, regions of Zimbabwe out there in those international markets. But I want to thank you so much, Mr. Nkomo, for being a fantastic guest, very informative and very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Farai.
Indeed. And that does it for this edition of the Focus Weekly. My guest was Moses Nkomo. He's an IP enthusiast, expert, but also a senior partner at D&M Attorneys. If you want to get in touch with us, interact with us, interface with us, subscribe to this program, the details are on your screens right now. We encourage you to follow us on our various digital platforms. I'll be back again next time to do this very same thing. This is the Focus Weekly. Be sure to join me then.